Welcome to the stage, Chris Urmson, presenting his talk, Google Self-Driving Car Project.
Wow, well, good afternoon, and thanks for coming out to hear the talk. I can tell you, I've given a bunch of talks, and I've never had President Obama open for me. So see what I can do to follow that. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the work we've been doing at Google on self-driving cars, a little bit of the history before that, a little bit about why we're doing this work, and a little about when you can expect to see it on the roads. But before I get started, I have the great privilege of coming here today to talk to you, but really the work I'm going to show you is that of an incredibly dedicated team we have at Google, whose mission is to improve people's lives by transforming mobility. And they come into work every day to push that forward and try and make the world better. Our story starts 130 years ago when Carl Benz invented the automobile. And the first time he took it out in public to showcase his invention, you know what he did? He crashed it into a wall. 60 years ago, the America's power companies put this ad in a Boy's Life magazine. The idea being that you'd get in your self-driving car, wearing your suit, playing dominoes with your lovely wife. It would follow buried cables in the ground and take you where you wanted to go. So the idea of self-driving cars isn't something new. It's just something where in the last few years, we've had the technology to really make some exciting advances. But even 20 years ago, we had cars that could drive across the country. These are colleagues of mine from Carnegie Mellon University who had a research program called No Hands Across America. And what they did is they took this minivan, outfitted it with a camera and some computers, and had it drive 98% of the way across the country without touching the steering wheel. So exciting times. Lots of work over the last many decades has gone into this field, but we haven't yet seen it out in the world. For me, the story in this space started in 2003. That was when the Defense Department announced the DARPA Grand Challenge. The idea here was that we'd have robots drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, about 150 miles across the desert. You weren't allowed to have remote controls. You weren't allowed to wrap a midget in aluminum foil and hide him inside and hope it all worked out. It had to be, honest to goodness, a car that could drive itself across the desert. So our team of grad students and faculty got together, and we went out to the desert to see how it would go. And, it was an adventure. This was 10 days before the race. Our vehicle went out, tripped over a little bit of soft mud, and smashed into the ground. We got the thing put back together because we had an army of graduate students. We entered in the competition, and that year, it launched out from the starting gate. It drove 7 miles, crashed through 3 or 4 fence posts, ended up on a berm, basically on fire. It was thrilling, right? And you can imagine the Defense Department and we were just massacred in the press, right? It was a 150-mile race, and the best competitor went 7 miles. But what was exciting of those 7 miles, we drove some of them at 40 miles per hour. Again, all by itself, no one on board. And at the time, that was a big deal. And so the Defense Department said, come back next year. Let's see how you do. And so we did. Came back next year. For those of you who aren't familiar, the black part is supposed to be down. Again, 10 days before the race, we got it put together. But we weren't the only people having fun out in the desert. These good folks from Stanford took their vehicles out and had some entertaining times. And then these poor folks from Berkeley somehow found a lake. And this was truly tragic because the next day they had an interview with the New York Times. And what was amazing was they took this thing out, dumped the water out of it, fixed it up, and the next day ran a demo for the New York Times. So really, the spirit of innovation and effort was really there. At the end of this challenge, 5 vehicles actually completed this 150-mile race. This was the vehicle from Stanford that won the competition, and it's now housed at the Smithsonian. And we were able to get up on our soapboxes and say, holy cow, these robot cars, they're going to do something good for the world. But we didn't know yet whether we could actually make it work. And the Defense Department said, that's great. You drove across the desert. You didn't bump into too many things. Why don't we have you come to an airbase and drive around there and see how you do with traffic? And so they came up with the Urban Challenge. And the idea here was we put robots at this abandoned airbase. They had to stay on their side of the road now. They had to navigate stop sign intersections, and they had to deal with other vehicles, both robotic, the ones with all the stuff on the top, and human-driven, paid stunt drivers that were out there to create traffic for the cars to interact with. And the vehicles had to drive 60 miles that day, and they had to do it again without any help. And at the end of the day, we had 2 crashes. First reported robot-on-robot car crash, so big day. But also, we had 6 vehicles that finished that challenge. And this was something that just 4 years before, everyone said was basically impossible. And so in 2007, we were really excited about the progress. And the Defense Department said, that's fantastic. You guys have made such progress. Problem is solved. Someone now should pick this up and figure out how to turn it into a product. And so this huge community that had gathered together to go after these challenges and compete and cooperate said, basically dwindled and diminished into nothing. But in people want it. In 2009, Google said, let's actually do something about this. Let's see if this technology really is ready to go out into the field and have people use it. And this is when I came to Google and we founded the team. And the mission of that team was to improve people's lives by transforming mobility. And what does that really mean? Well, first and foremost, it's about safety. So on America's roads, we kill 38,000 people every year. To put that in perspective, that's more than a 737 falling out of the sky 5 days a week. Now, we completely wouldn't accept that in aviation, so why do we accept it on our roads? And those numbers, though harrowing, really aren't telling the whole story. So we've driven 1.4 million miles, and our car's seen a lot of things, like people parked in bushes. If you look on the left here, somebody parked in the median. We've had cars make left turn U-turns from the middle of the road. We've had motorcycles, if you watch closely in the bottom left here, sneak past us, taking life in their hands. And watch this bicyclist attempt to run a red light, and then just at the last moment, think better of it and get out of the way. We've had people stopped at red lights, and then for no real good reason, just charge off through them. And we've had people, as we're making turns with the light, decide, whatever, I'm going to go. And our cars have to deal with that and react to it. And we've seen worse. So watch in the bottom left as 2 motorcycles pass us, and then a truck hits them. Everybody walked away. And then here, watch these 2 cars join in the intersection. And so over the 1.4 million miles that we've driven, we're now even more confident that this technology can't get out into the world soon enough, just from the safety benefits alone. And it's not just about safety. So it turns out people sell cars like this, and as you know, this is what we get. Turns out between 1990 and 2010, we drove 38% more miles in this country, but we only added 6% more lanes. So that traffic really is getting worse. It's not your parents just telling you a story about when they were young. Traffic sucks and it's getting worse. And it has a real cost. So if you take the average commute in America, you multiply it by the number of workers, you get to 6 billion minutes per day of people sat in traffic. You take that and divide it by the average American lifetime of 70 years. That's 162 wasted lifetimes per day of people sitting in traffic. Try and contemplate that for a moment, right? It's incredible. We're literally killing people with gridlock. And then there's those people who don't have that privilege of sitting in traffic. So this is Steve. He's an incredible guy. It turns out for him, instead of taking 30 minutes to get to work in the morning, it takes 2 hours because he's blind. And he has to patch together various kinds of public transit or ask friends and family. And so for someone like Steve, who used to be able to drive and has lost that privilege, his world changes. And we can give people like that back their mobility and let them engage properly with life. And so when I say we're about improving people's lives by transforming mobility, it's that whole spectrum of issues that we'd like to kind of address with the technology. Our program can really be broken down into 3 phases. We started in 2009 not knowing really whether this technology would work at scale on the roads. We spent a couple of years figuring that out. From there, we started to master freeway driving because it's easier than most other driving. And then over the last few years, we've been pushing into driving everywhere on the roads. So when I came to Google and when the team started, we set 2 goals. The first was to drive 100,000 miles on public roads, which was 10 times more than anyone had done before. And the other was to drive 1,000 miles of interesting places. And the reason why we set these two goals is, as an engineer, your job is to cheat. And so if someone says drive 100,000 miles, what you do is you get a bunch of cars, you put them on the freeway, and you have them drive at 65 miles an hour. And you get that done as quickly as possible. And it turns out we did that. But by picking 1,000 miles of interesting roads, we were able to really understand the breadth of the problem, whether it was actually tractable and accessible. And so we spent a couple of years working on that. And to do that, we built a fleet of Priuses. We put cameras, radars, and lasers on them, and we set them loose with our test drivers on board to understand the driving problem. And we built some cool technology in the process. One of the things we built were maps at city scale that allowed us to see what the world would look like from the laser, allow us to understand the shape of the world down to the resolution of only a few inches, and allow us to understand where traffic lights were, lane markers, and whatever else is on the road that's important for driving is. And we could build these at city scale. And we could do cool things with that, like understand very precisely where the car is. So in this video, the white box is where GPS would tell you it is, and the silver car is where it really is in the world. And that would have been a bad day. So you can't just trust GPS. We all know that, right? We've been downtown and seen when GPS tells us we're a block off from where we really are. The way this works is that our cars have a map, they have the sensors they see in the moment, and then they match the two. Much like if you've ever taken a tracing of a drawing, you know where the drawing paper was when you started. Except they do this at 10 times per second. And so we know very precisely where the cars are. After a year and a half, we said, we've got this. This technology, it's not done. It's going to be hard to do, but we're going to get to the point where it can become a product. And so we started to think about what should that product be. And based on our experience, we said the easiest place to go drive was on the freeway. So let's try and make a product where you get in the car, you put it in a lane on the freeway, press a button, it drives until you're ready to get off the freeway, and then you take over and drive off the freeway. And it took about a year and a half, but we got pretty good at this. And this is what that driving looked like. So it's very geometric. The car understands there's a big truck to its right, and so it would shift a little to the left to make passengers feel more comfortable. And it would do things to try and make other drivers better too. So here it realizes that it's in a blind spot of another vehicle, hits the brakes, and slows down a little bit. Now, unfortunately, in a very robotic kind of way, it falls into the blind spot of the car behind it, has to hit the brakes and fall out from that too. But overall, it worked really quite well. And we got to the point where we said, you know what, this is good enough that we should try and see how people like this product. And so we sent out email to Googlers, not people that worked on the project, but other people that worked in random parts of the company. And we said, hey, we've got a self-driving car, would you like to try it? And shockingly, we got like 4,000 responses in a couple of days. And we ended up having about 140 people that would take the car and use it in their daily lives, some for a day, some for a week. And we really wanted to understand, what people would think about this, because working at Google, if you're not working on like teleportation, you're probably not trying hard enough. And so, we figured let's see what's happening with this. And we had one guy come in. I'll never forget this. He comes in and he tells us, "I'm a Porsche driver. This whole thing is stupid. I just like gadgets, and so I figured I'd try this." And we gave him the car for 5 days. And at the end of 5 days, he came back and he said, "You can't have it back." Which was nice. And then he wanted to say, it turns out I'm a terrible driver. And it turns out all those other people are terrible drivers too. And what this technology does is it makes us better, safer drivers, and it lets people who want to drive be out on the road and drive. And we heard this kind of thing from everyone who tried the cars. And so this, as someone trying to get a technology out in the world, was awesome, right? This is what you want to hear. People love your product. And then we looked at what people were doing in the car. And these were part of a test subject group, and we told them, look, you have to pay attention the whole time. This is a prototype. It might not work. Pay attention. And we showed them. We took them out and showed them that it does fail some of the time. But after a few days, all of them just believed that it worked because it did actually work quite well. And we saw what they were doing in the car in this study. And it turned out, some of them, liked the trend that was no one driving, so they kind of just leaned the seat back. On the freeway. We had somebody else who looks at their phone and says, my battery's low. So it turns around, digs in their bag, pulls out their laptop, pulls out their charging cable, plugs the two in, looks up at the phone, yep, charging, and then looks back out the window at 65 miles an hour. And so we said, this is not good. And now we have three options in front of us. One is, let's just put it out in the world and see what happens. How bad can it be? The next one was, okay, people want to do other things in the car. Let's make it so they don't. If they're not looking out the window, let's shock them or scold them or something, right? Maybe not the best product idea. And then the third one was, let's make it so that's not a problem. Let's make it so the cars really can drive everywhere, and that when they get in it, they don't have to worry about it, and they can do whatever they want to do in the car. And this has the added benefit that anyone can use it, because it turns out if you have a product that goes on the freeway, if you're blind, you can't get in the car and get it onto the freeway. So if we want to help those people, we need to do it the whole way. And so a few years ago, we took this on. And if you compare this picture to the previous picture, it gives you an inkling of how much harder the problem really is. So this is an intersection I go through every day on my way to work, and it turns out there's cars going everywhere, there's a train crossing, a pedestrian crossing, there's cyclists, pedestrians, and then some wonderful civil engineer went and made the road have a sharp angle in it like that a car can't actually drive. And so we decided, yeah, we're going to take this on, even though it's orders of magnitude more difficult than freeway driving. And in doing that, we also wanted to understand what a vehicle that's intended for self-driving should look like. And so we developed our prototype vehicle, having all of the appropriate interfaces for the computer to be able to engage with it and have redundant actuation, the roof design so the sensors can see. And also, it was intended to be friendly because we knew this technology was new. And we wanted to introduce it in a way that people could accept. And of course, we wanted to think about what should the experience be in a vehicle that's intended to get you from A to B, not be driven from A to B. And as we thought about that, we thought, well, what's all the superfluous stuff in here? Things like steering wheel, brake pedal, and gas pedal don't need to be there if you're the captain and not the helmsman. If you're able to tell the car where you want it to go and not have to worry about making it do it the whole way. And so we were able to simplify the interior, and it's really quite a transformational experience. And after a few years of work, we were able to get these vehicles out and testing. This is at our closed test site in the Central Valley of California. And what was cool was that all the software we developed for our other vehicles, because it's basically a driver, was able to plug into this car and just have it go, and have it drive around with nobody in it, and interact with cyclists and pedestrians on whatever else our test team threw at it. To make this happen, we had to build an unprecedented level of sensing into the vehicle. So our cars use a combination of lasers, camera, and radar data to see the world around them. And when we look at the laser data, it looks like this. So we can see right up to the skin of the vehicle and on the ground around the vehicle. And then we have peripheral vision out 360 degrees to 70 meters. And as the car needs to focus down the road, it can actually zoom in and see 200 meters away, things like buildings or streets or oncoming cars. And armed with this ability to perceive the world, we could then start to think about how does the car drive. So that starts with the car understanding roughly how it's positioned in the world, its role and pitch. Then we layer on top of that the map that it has, so now it knows precisely where it is in the world, and maybe a little bit about what to expect around it. Then we take the 1.5 million laser measurements that the car gets per second, combine that with the radar and camera data, and now we can actually start to build a model of the world around the car. So this is what the car sees to begin with, and it's able to turn it into this. It understands that there's a cyclist in the road, there's a few cars on the side of the road and one moving down the road, a pedestrian, and even a traffic cone off to the side. Now this is pretty good, but it's not really enough to understand the scene. It turns out what the car is looking at here is a police officer with his door open. And so our cars today can understand that the lights are flashing on the top of the car, and that makes this particular kind of lights flashing means it's a police car, and that the door is open. And so we have to anticipate the behavior of the other actors on the road based on that information. And at about 10 times per second, we make a prediction of what those actors are going to do. So in this case, we expect the cyclist to continue riding down the road. And given that model of the world, we can now figure out what are we going to do. So the car generates a trajectory that includes where it needs to slow down or who it needs to slow down for. And all of this is powered by the fact that we basically share data between the vehicles. So at the coarsest level, this means that one, our vehicle sees construction, tells our data center, that tells another vehicle, and now it can be in the left lane and avoid navigating the construction. Much more interestingly than that, our cars have seen thousands and thousands of cars on the road and thousands of pedestrians on the road. And that means that it now can learn how to pull those people out of the background and see them. And even better than that, it's seen how they move, so it can start to predict what they're going to do on the road. So here, a pedestrian crossing the road is likely to continue in the crosswalk. A cyclist riding down the side of the road is going to continue riding down the side of the road and maybe bump out for cars. Somebody going the wrong way down the road will continue to do that. We can pick up the subtle cues of turning, and even the more subtle cues of someone making a U-turn instead of a left turn, and yield to that all appropriately. Over the last year, we've really doubled down and focused on kind of driving naturally in neighborhoods. And so we've got used to seeing people kick balls into the road and chase them. We know on narrow roads you have to pull to the side and make way for other traffic. Sometimes our cars even encounter other self-driving cars on the road and have to move to the side to make room for them. We've seen people push cars out of the road. We know that if a lane is blocked, that those vehicles have to go somewhere. So here, a car slows down to make room for the cyclists and not pinch them up against that parked truck. And we've had people come out and play with us with their cars. We love that. And we even make room for big transit vehicles and others as they're making their way through traffic. Now, overall, this works really quite well, and we've done 1.4 million miles. Unfortunately, on Valentine's Day this year, we had the first time that one of our vehicles took an action that ended up resulting in us bumping into a bus. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. Fundamentally, this came down to the fact that our car made an assumption about what the bus driver was going to do, and the bus driver made an assumption about what our car was going to do, and they weren't the same assumption. And this is what driving is about. And so let me tell you how this happened. So our car here is on a main road, El Camino Real in Mountain View, and it's in the rightmost lane. And like in many, many towns or cities, the rightmost lane is extra wide. Because people, what they do is as they approach a stoplight like this with cars stopped, and if they're intending to make a right turn, they'll sneak into the right half of the lane and push past them and make the turn. It's how we keep kind of traffic flowing efficiently. And this is something our car didn't used to do, but based on our experience and what we've seen on the road, this is an important part of driving in the community in a natural way. So we recently implemented this capability. And as the car comes up to this intersection, that's exactly what it does. It starts to pull to the right half of that lane and make the turn. As it makes progress down that maneuver, it gets to a point where it sees a couple of sandbags in the road, and it says, you know, I really shouldn't drive over those sandbags. So it comes to a stop. And it sees cars to its left, and it says, you know what, I've just got to hold up here and wait for my turn to go. So it sits there, the traffic light turns green, and traffic begins to move. And at this point, the cars in front have moved away, and our car uses its sensors, looks back, and sees this bus. And it looks at the size of the bus, it looks at the width of the lane, it looks at the position of our car in the lane, and it says, it's not going to fit. At least it thinks it's not going to fit. And in that moment, it says, okay, that means I have to assume that that bus driver is going to slow down. Well, it turns out the guy driving the bus was a good bus driver, and he looked at that gap, and he said, you know what, I can make it through. Right? And we looked at it, and if our car hadn't moved, he would have passed our car with less than a foot of space. So it would have been tight, but he would have got through. Our car figured that's not going to happen. He'll slow down. It started to move and then bumped into the side of the bus. And it did that at about 2 miles per hour. And then it got dragged a little bit by the bus. And it tore up some bodywork for us, and it ripped off one of our poor sensors. The bus driver, the bus, all the passengers on the bus, everybody was fine. We dinged the bus up a little bit. And so this was a tough day for us. And we don't like our cars bumping into things. And in the 1.4 million miles that we've done, we've never had it happen before. Certainly where they caused it. And so we took away from this a bunch of learning. And one of the things we've done since then is we've implemented about 3,500 tests that our software now goes through and gives us some confidence that this won't happen again. And we have some confidence that that works because over many years, we've interacted with a lot of cyclists. And let me show you another thing that happened in Mountain View a little while ago at night. Let me set this up for you. This is our car coming to an intersection, and it's driving along. And the little blue thing you can see in the image at the top there is a bicyclist. And if you squint at the camera engine at the bottom, you might be able to see it as well. So let me let the video play. We're going along. Cyclist swerves. Out of nowhere, somebody comes in the other direction. And the car, all by itself, hit the brakes, saw that cyclist coming, and avoided him. And this is how it played out. So the car is driving along. It clearly sees the cyclist to the left, but probably unlike any of you, it also saw the pedestrian crossing the street to our left, and it saw another car on the other side of the intersection, and you may have missed that there was actually a car coming in the direct lane adjacent to us. As we get closer to the intersection, the car can still see that cyclist, still see the pedestrian, the other vehicles, and as soon as that other cyclist, the second cyclist here, pops around the corner, it begins reacting to it, slowing down, making space, and the cyclist goes on his way. And ironically enough, continues biking down the wrong side of the road. Gotta love people. Now this isn't, of course, the weirdest things we've seen on the road. A little over a year and a half ago, our car was in Mountain View and did this. Came around a corner, and what you're looking at here is a duck and a woman in an electric wheelchair with a broom chasing it in the road. Now, we have a team of people whose job it is to come up with weird stuff. And they didn't come up with this. And, you know, I looked at the DMV handbook, and there's no page in there about woman with duck in road. And this really highlights part of the challenge, is that our vehicles have to generalize what they have seen and be able to deal with unusual situations. In this case, what we call it is anomaly detection. So it looks out, it sees this thing happening in front of it, and it knows that's not normal. And it doesn't know what to do about it, so it slows down and kind of lets it play out and then goes on its way. And when I saw this, I thought this was definitely going to be the weirdest thing we see on the road. Well, I was wrong. So since then, we've seen people play Frogger with our car. Please don't. And then, you know, honestly, Austin kind of takes the cake. So here, we're at an intersection. That's 1, 2, and wait for it. That's 3 cars going the wrong way down the road, all at once. That was fantastic. We had this, some dude comes out of nowhere, decides to roll on our hood, and then run away. And then this is great. So, you know, people are interested in our car and want to see how it reacts. So this guy was apparently so excited that he came running out without his clothes on. So really, I just want to say thank you, Austin, for keeping it weird. Really, really appreciate it. So the number one question that I get when I give a talk like this is, when's it going to happen? You know, when can I get a self-driving car? And for many people, this isn't kind of idle curiosity, right? There's people with health conditions who are blind and can't drive, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, all things that limit their ability to get around in the world today. And then many of us have parents or elderly friends who are at that point in life where it isn't, you know, they're used to driving. They have that experience, and we have to talk about the fact that maybe they shouldn't be doing it anymore. And that's a crushing conversation. And so how quickly can we get this into those people's hands? And if you read the papers, you're going to see that it's maybe 3 years, maybe 30 years. And you know, I guess I'm here to tell you that I think, honestly, it's a bit of both. And I'm going to tell you why. And there's kind of 3 parts to this I'm going to talk about. The first is the idea that this technology is almost certainly going to come out incrementally. And the second has to do with the idea that when it does come out, we're going to want it to be better than human drivers. And it turns out the second and third points are, first, that we can do a really good job of modeling how good our driver is, the self-driving car, but that it's actually really difficult to understand how good people are. So we'll get into that. So when I was 16 years old, probably like many of you, the first thing I did was go to the DMV. You know, I read a leaflet, checked a quick multiple choice quiz, did okay on that, went out for a drive with an examiner for 15 minutes, got told I didn't do too bad, got my license, and I was cleared to drive, right? just good, go for it. And it turns out that's not really what ended up happening, right? I didn't feel comfortable driving. My parents certainly didn't feel comfortable with me driving. And at first, I could drive around the neighborhood. And then at some point, it was OK for me to drive to the next town. And then, eventually, on Tuesday, I drove from the airport to the hotel in the middle of a giant thunderstorm on 35 with giant trucks around me, right? And 16-year-old me definitely should not have done that. And so when we let human drivers loose on the road, normally we have this kind of graduated system where we either self-impose or our parents impose. The same is going to be true with self-driving cars. So if you look at the way we've developed vehicles, we started really driving on the freeways. And we got to the point where the driving was, and we started here because it's the easiest situation to drive in, because all the traffic's going in the same direction. It's all moving at about the same speed. The road doesn't change shape quickly. And then we moved to driving on boulevards, where the cars are still separated. We have to add in cross-traffic and traffic lights, but it's comparatively easy. And then we moved into residential streets. And here, these look easy, but the stakes are high here, right? Because we live there, and people are close to the road, and it matters. And then finally, we moved into driving in urban centers. And here, everything is so compact. Cars are coming from every which way. There's all kinds of traffic, pedestrians, and mixed interactions going on. And this is kind of the hardest type of driving. So when we think about the technology rolling out over time, we imagine we're going to find places where the weather is good, where the roads are easy to drive, and the technology might come there first. And then once we get confidence with that, we'll move to more and more challenging locations. The reason why we're going to have confidence to move to those locations is because we're going to be able to understand how well our cars drive. And there's a lot of different dimensions that we look at this on, but let me talk about a few. So one is we have this test facility in Central California. And there we have teams of people whose job it is to make the car's life difficult. And they come up with all kinds of crazy things that you or I may never see in our lifetime of driving. My favorite recent one was there's this thing called snailing, which I didn't know was a thing. And it turns out what you do is you walk out into the middle of the road, and then you lie down on your belly, and you crawl like a snail. And I don't know why. It's probably the internet's fault. Like, what do you do about that, right? It's just so bizarre. Well, it turns out our cars have seen that now, and they know how to deal with it. And they've seen many, many other kind of crazy scenarios like that. And then on top of that, we have our vehicles out on the road every day, and they do over 10,000 miles of testing every week. That's almost the same as what a typical American driver does in a year. So we can take that experience that they've gathered, all that sensor data, bring it back to our data centers, and then it turns out, here's the other magic number, we do over 3 million miles of testing and simulation every day. And so our cars can use that cumulative experience to get better, and we can quantify how well they perform in simple driving situations on the roads, in weather, on freeways, and we can figure out when's the right time, when are they safe enough to be on the road with other humans, with providing the service we're hoping they will. And then finally, let's talk a little bit about the challenge of quantifying human driving performance. Because you can look up the statistics for fatalities, right? As I said earlier, there was about 38,000 people killed on America's roads last year, 1.2 million people killed worldwide. Well, that number doesn't really capture the overall quality of driving. Right? It turns out that people do goofy things when they're driving. If you think back to the video I showed earlier of the cyclist, this cyclist on the wrong side of the road comes around the corner, and I've watched this video a couple of dozen times, and I am convinced if I were behind the wheel, I would have hit him. And the reason why is I would be transfixed by the cyclist on the left that's weaving around. That's the threat that I saw. And unlike the computer, I can't kind of shard my intelligence and look at all of the different people that are on the road and react to them. And so if I look at the scene, basically I see kind of 2 wins to nothing for the self-driving car here. And then when you go beyond that and look at the quality of driving that we have on the road, you can start to dig into statistics around, say, collisions. But again, that doesn't capture the time that people weave around. But that collision data is actually relatively flawed because we don't report most of the collisions that occur. If you ask NHTSA, it turns out they estimate that something like 55% of all accidents that happen on our road don't get reported. A recent study by the Virginia Transportation Technology Institute came up with the fact that it might be as high as 80% of accidents that happen on our roads don't get reported. So it's kind of like we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. We don't accept that that's good enough. We really do want to start to get into the understanding, at least along the dimensions we can measure, the quality of our cars versus the quality of human driving. And so we commissioned a study with the same folks at VTTI. And what they did is they dug into what is basically the best corpus of human driving performance. This was the SHARP-2 study, which was a naturalistic driving data set. Basically, they outfitted a bunch of cars with cameras and accelerometers and had people drive them around in their daily lives. And from that, they were able to look at what do people really do on the road and how often accidents happen, even the minor ones that don't get reported. And based on that, several million miles of data and our 1 and a bit million miles of self-driving data, we were able to actually compare the two. And there's a lot of caveats that I'll give you about this data, but the first blush result is that our cars are actually doing pretty good. That across the accident classes, level 3 being the least significant accident, level 1 being the most, the green bar, the self-driving car bar, is smaller than the human bar. And that's actually pretty compelling. Now again, there's error bars on these because of the size of the data. And you have to remember that our self-driving data was all based around the fact that we had a human in the vehicle with them helping test the system. But we're definitely heading in the right direction. So I wanted to leave you with one last thought here, and that is that we're all basically in this together. Right? We all know someone who can't drive, be it because of blindness or illness. We have parents who at some point we won't want to drive or they won't want to drive, and all of us have sat in traffic and hated it. And so if we can push this technology forward, we can make that happen. Now, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be bad things that happen along the way. I'm confident we're going to have another day like our Valentine's Day, and almost certainly we're going to have worse days than that over time. But this technology is so important that if we band together and we think about the net benefit for society, together we can actually make it happen. So thank you very much. Love to take some questions. Drink of water. Okay.
They're always asking in different seminars, and no one's answered it properly. I probably do, but I can't. I take that as answer. There's a thing of the self-driving car, old lady, and the self-driving car.
Okay. So this is one of the questions, probably the second most asked question that I get, and that is, so what happens if the car has to make kind of a tragic decision? So there's an old lady on one side of the road, there's a baby on the other, and the car has to drive into one or the other. And it turns out this is kind of a philosophical question we've wrangled with as a society for hundreds of years. And there isn't a good answer. And so the way we approach this question is, first, we make our cars incredibly good defensive drivers. They avoid these situations even more than people do today. And then the second is that we try and express the answer in a way that the car can actually handle. And that is that they try hardest to avoid hitting vulnerable road users, pedestrians and cyclists. From there, they work hard to avoid hitting other moving things on the road. And then after that, they avoid static things that are parked in the world. Okay, so maybe I should take this question here first and then come to you. So question, what's been the biggest obstacle in bringing the Google self-driving car project to fruition? Well, so far the biggest challenge has been technical. And that has been around having the vehicle really understand the world around it. If you think about driving today, there's an infinite variety of situations you might encounter on the road. It's a really challenging situation. So understanding what's going on and then predicting the behavior of those other actors on the road. As we move forward, the challenge is figuring out how does this come into society and how does it get used in a way that people are excited about and becomes a product that's worthwhile. You had a question?
Yeah, the current be obviously other people who are also doing research on that stuff.
Yep.
Like you can buy Tesla or now an E-Class. Where do you see your difference between them, or how do you see the technology which is available today if I buy an E-Class
Right.
or Tesla?
So great question about how do you see the technology, the difference between, well, let me try it again. Lots of people working on self-driving cars. Is there any difference between them? You know, how do we think about that? So first and foremost, we're really excited that a lot of people are working on this. It's a really important technology. The more people working on it, the more likely it is that we're going to see it out in the world. When you think about self-driving, it's now been kind of this big name that's applied to almost anything that involves active safety in a car. And there's things, features like collision mitigation braking, where the car, if it sees something stopped in the road in front of you, will help you brake before you hit it, through to things where lane keep assist and adaptive cruise control, and then all the way to fully self-driving vehicles. Our focus really has been on developing fully self-driving cars, ones where you don't have to pay attention. Most of those other systems, you have to monitor them the whole time, and we think that's a really difficult thing, particularly for a relatively untrained human driver to be able to do. Cool. Okay, from Twitter, how do you think in-car entertainment will change when drivers don't have to focus on driving? Well, I think this is really exciting, right? If you think about the opportunity with self-driving cars, it's going to change the way we get around fundamentally. And it's going to mean that people are going to use the car for all kinds of things that we never thought about before. So maybe it's you sit in the car, and instead of taking a 4-hour flight from San Francisco to LA, you just get it, or a 1-hour flight, 4 hours gate to gate if you can count TSA time or door to door. You get in the car, and maybe it takes you 6 or 7 hours, but you get to enjoy a couple of movies, you get to sleep in the car on the way. So I think the experience in the car is going to be like another room for you, except it's the room that moves with you as you go around the city. Question is, how important is GPS technology maturity for this project? In other words, how does this scale to places outside, say, the US? Well, our technology, our cars don't actually rely on GPS because there's so many places, even within the US, where GPS doesn't work. Imagine you're driving through downtown Austin and the tall buildings are blocking or reflecting the signals, driving along mountains or through tunnels. So our cars, by using that mapping capability, are able to know where they are even when GPS isn't available. Hi, Chris. What about cost? How long do you think it will take for prices to normalize for mass adoption? So this is a great question, and I think it's tough to say. When we look at the technology today, there's nothing fundamentally expensive. So far, we only have a few dozen of these cars, and it turns out whenever you make a few dozen of something, it's incredibly, incredibly pricey. But when you look at what's in them, there's not anything particularly interesting there. There's no kind of unobtainium. So as this goes to volume and as it adopted, the technology is going to become, relatively inexpensive and should be accessible to everyone. That's really our vision for it.
Hey, Chris. How transportable is this technology into other types of vehicles like forklifts,
Yeah. So the question is, how transportable is this technology to other kind of things that move around? Well, it's fairly transportable, but when you think about driving on the road, there's a whole set of different rules and a whole set of challenges that are different than, say, off-road racing or driving a forklift in a factory. So parts of it can transfer, but parts of it you have to specialize for the task at hand. What would you say to a car enthusiast that enjoys driving? Well, this is actually wonderful for you, because it turns out most people, even car enthusiasts, don't like their commute in the morning. If you are someone who, if I ask, do you enjoy commuting down the 101 in the Bay Area, and you put your hand up, you should probably be committed. There's something wrong with you, even if you love cars. So why not let it be that you can enjoy your passion for driving and do that when you're taking a trip from A to A, rather than when you're going to work in the morning and could maybe be using that time better to rest or relax rather than fighting traffic. Next slide. What's the speed protocol for these cars? Do they follow the speed limit? Do they ever speed? So we developed our cars to follow the speed limit. They're supposed to be on the road, following the law, and if you ask the police, the right thing to do is to follow the speed limit. That said, when we developed the capability for the car to drive on the freeway that people could ride in it, there we had a little rocker switch that they could tell the car they explicitly wanted it to go faster than the speed limit and allow them to get going a little quicker. We actually think about this a lot, and we've had interesting engagements with communities, because we get a lot of vocal people that say, you know, geez, I'd never want a car that doesn't break the speed limit. But then we almost get as many people who say, we get messages from the community that say how wonderful it is that the car drives through the school zone outside my house at the right speed and slows down traffic. And that makes me and my community feel safer. And so we really think this is actually promising that it actually follows the speed limit. What about intelligence in the infrastructure, like traffic lights and road signs? So there's a lot of work that's being put in vehicle-to-vehicle communication and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, and we think that's great and has a lot of potential. But we believe that this is a different kind of technology, and it should be developed in parallel. And we want our cars to work in the world as it is now, because otherwise you end up in this kind of chicken and egg problem where you can't have self-driving cars until they deploy the infrastructure. And if you haven't got self-driving cars, why are you putting the effort into deploying the infrastructure? So let's get it out there in the world and working. And then when other bits of technology come along, let's bring it into the car and share that knowledge with them. Next question. What are the issues you are working on right now? Is it just about getting more miles done? So no, it's not just miles for the sake of miles. So today, our cars are probably, I would classify them as paranoid. And what we really want to do is we want to make them drive a little more smoothly while maintaining that paranoia. So for those of you who are kind of math geeks, this is really finding that right place on the precision recall curve where instead of jumping at shadows some of the times because they're worried that they might miss something, they understand exactly, that is a shadow and don't react to it. Next question. Self-driving cars on a snowy road, all good. So this is actually one of the limitations of the technology. I talked earlier about this mapping idea and the fact that the cars use the maps to know precisely where they are. Well, when the world changes, because it's covered in snow, that becomes more difficult. And so the way we do that today doesn't really work with densely covered snow or in the mountains where there might be 6 feet of snow, and between seasons the world changes dramatically. That said, the part about traction control and steering on the road actually works pretty well. Early on, we used to test our cars kind of autocross style in gravel parking lots, and so they could slide. I joke actually that at one point we were probably the world's only Prius drifting team, certainly self-driving Prius drifting team. Next one. What's been done about hacking risks? That's a great question. So hacking risks are not really a function of self-driving, right? They're a function of the fact that our world is connected. And so we do all of the good things that you should be doing to protect your software, your computers in this day and age. So we work with the Google cybersecurity teams. We look at minimizing the attack surfaces. We try to keep up to date with all the security patches. And we basically limit what you can tell the car so that you can't give it that kind of a command that would cause it to do something incredible. Next slide. Is there a way that people can sign up to be testers for self-driving car? I love where you're at, but not yet. We're still working on this. We do hope to get this technology out in the world soon, and as we do, we'll let people know. Do Google cars follow all the laws, and have they found places where the law is suboptimal? So we do our best to follow all the laws. And this is a great question because it's actually very challenging. So by law, you're not supposed to cross a double yellow line. But we know that if there's a car double parked on a residential street with a double yellow line in the middle of the road, it's actually kind of societally okay to do that. And so we've been having to work with our cars to make them kind of ease the way partway across the line to actually be able to drive and work in society. So in general, we really do follow all the laws, but there's kind of subtle things around the edges where you have to interpret. How do you see town planning changing? Will we still need car parks if our cars head home themselves? I think this is actually one of the really exciting things about the future of this technology. That today, when we look at major cities, a huge part of the infrastructure is devoted to storing cars. Basically, for every car on the road in America, there's 4 parking spaces today. It's gigantic, right? So imagine a world where all of that real estate, that kind of urine-scented concrete bunkers in the center of cities, can be turned into office space, retail space, residential park space. right? There's an incredible opportunity in the future to rebuild our cities and make them more accessible and walkable. Is Google moving into manufacturing, or will you license the technology to manufacturers? No, we don't want to make cars. It turns out that making a car is really hard. And the car companies have spent 100 years doing that, investing in the technology, investing in the infrastructure to build them, and they're really good at it, right? It's actually surprising to me how easy it is to forget how marvelous an automobile is. Think about something that is driving down the road with hundreds and hundreds of explosions under the hood, thousands of explosions under the hood, turns on every day, doesn't matter whether it's minus 40 degrees Celsius out or 40 degrees Celsius above, and works, right? The fact that that just happens is amazing. And so we want to find partners to work with to bring the technology to market. Can we get them in a more attractive color scheme? Wow, harsh. I'm wounded. So I think I'm going to borrow Henry Ford's line here. You can get them in any color you want, as long as it's white. Next one. Or not. Okay. Shoot. So the question is about privacy and the fact that these cars have sensors on them scanning the public place. And that this is a really, again, another important question. And as this technology develops and rolls out, we need to think deeply about that. Today, we use that data to allow the cars to be able to learn and get better as drivers. But as we have more of them out there, we definitely need to think about those implications and find ways to protect privacy. It's a very important part of making this technology viable. One last question. Yep. So the question is, so our cars are driving around, they see lots of things in the world, and they see them, often, so can you do something with that? And my answer is, I'm sure you can, but we have spent a bunch of time trying to make the cars drive and haven't really had a whole lot of time to think about that. But it is pretty exciting to think about having in a way that balances with the privacy concerns, a really up-to-date live model of a city. Really kind of interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much.